While preparing to speak at a conference in Singapore recently, I was doing some research on some of Singapore's history, particularly the fall of Singapore during World War II. What I learned is that a lot of what I had been taught in school, in history class about the fall of Singapore during World War II was actually not very accurate. What I learned is that the reason the Japanese invasion of Singapore occurred is that essentially the British were unprepared. They weren't ready for the Japanese invasion. And that's actually not true. The British were very, very ready. They were very methodical. The challenge was this: they were ready in the wrong way. See, the established assumption, the paradigm was this: if you're going to take an island like Singapore, you're going to arrive from the sea. So while the British had heavily fortified the east coast of Singapore and were camped out ready for the Japanese invasion, scanning the horizon to identify the threat when it emerged, the challenge was over their right shoulder, crossing the Johor Strait in collapsible boats, on collapsible bicycles that had been invented for this invasion, came the Japanese. And they took the island nation of Singapore at rapid speed. In fact, so quickly that when the news got back to high command in London, they almost didn't believe it. And can I suggest the same dynamic that unfolded in February 1942, the fall of Singapore, is exactly the dynamic that is occurring in many businesses right now. When it comes to the most significant disruptive threat you need to be aware of, it's probably a competitor that is not on your radar right now. In fact, I was working recently with a group of optometrists and I was asking them, what is the most significant disruptive threat for you as an industry? And they named some of the big chain stores, and they talked about the fact that you've got many industries that are getting into that marketplace that haven't been there in the past, but they talked about the retail shop fronts. And I said, well, I get that. I understand that many retailers are coming into your space that maybe hadn't been in there before, but I asked how many of those optometrists had heard of a technology called Opternative. Now, in a room of over 200 optometrists, highly experienced professionals, only 3 of them put their hand up. And so I went on to describe how Opternative works. It's an amazing technology that allows you to use the camera in your smartphone, your tablet device, to do a full eye examination from the comfort of your home. That examination is then submitted, a diagnosis is done by a trained technician. They then send to you your prescription. You jump online, order frames and lenses from anywhere you choose, and they arrive at your doorstep a few days later with no need to go anywhere near your local optometrist. And you should have seen the blood drain from the faces of these optometrists, because this wasn't even something they were thinking about. They were so focused on their other retail competitors, they weren't mindful of the threat, just like in the case of Singapore, that was coming over their right shoulder in a way that no one's expecting, and in a sense that will potentially be a game changer in the years to come. Now, it's interesting, we often look at the role technology plays, something I refer to as the Silicon Valley spread. The fact that these Silicon Valley giants like Google and Facebook are going outside their traditional areas. We've seen Google go into the travel space in the last few years. We've seen Facebook certainly go into the banking and financial space. And yet it's not just technology companies that you need to be aware of to make sure they're on your radar. Klaus Schwab, who's the founder of the World Economic Forum, suggests that it's often incumbent, significant old businesses who are now, because of technology, moving into parallel industries. They're crossing industry boundaries. So certainly you need to be mindful of the technology startup world, but it's not just them, it's often those incumbents you need to be mindful of as well. So the challenge is this: when it comes to identifying unconventional competitive threats, it is so tempting, it is so easy to dismiss them. When you see someone who's not traditionally been a competitor come into your space, it's easy to say, oh, they won't last. We know how to do things in this industry. They're the new player. It won't stick. They're a flash in the pan. They're the flavor of the month. We often dismiss or we ridicule or we deride those new entrants. And the challenge is, if you do that, by the time that you realize that maybe they are a genuine threat, it can sometimes be too late. And that is the danger of dismissing unconventional competitive threats. Case in point, look at the example of Jim Keyes, the CEO of Blockbuster back in 2008, who famously said, Netflix isn't even on our radar when it comes to competition. Now, this was a very mindset, the sort of short-sightedness, even the arrogance that led to the demise of Blockbuster a few short years later. So who is the competitor that may come onto the scene in the next few years that will be unconventional, that you need to make sure is on your radar, or at least you have an awareness to be on the lookout for, because that is the form disruption is most likely to take?